Jack Matthews, the owner of Matthews Motors, sat behind the wheel of his beat-up Toyota Corolla, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. As he stared at the shiny vehicles displayed in neat rows across his dealership's lot, something gnawed at him. It wasn't the gleaming new trucks that bothered him. It was the mounting sense of unease that had been festering within him for the past few months. Matthews Motors was a well-known name in the community. Jack had worked tirelessly to build it from the ground up. Over the years, he'd created a reputation for himself and his dealership, ensuring that customers left satisfied, confident, and happy with their purchases. But lately, there had been a growing number of mixed reviews. Some customers raved about the vehicles and customer service, while others voiced frustrations about hidden fees, unmentioned add-ons, and aggressive sales tactics. "What's going on?" Jack muttered to himself, the thought that something was rotten beneath the surface eating away at him. He had put his blood, sweat, and tears into this business, into creating something that people trusted. The idea that his team, his business, might be slipping into dishonesty made his stomach churn. That's why he was here today, disguised. He wasn't driving his usual expensive car. Instead, he was in his modest Toyota Corolla, wearing old jeans, a flannel shirt, and a baseball cap. His normally immaculate appearance had been swapped for something that made him blend in. He looked like just another average Joe, ready to shop for a truck. Jack Matthews was about to go undercover in his own dealership. With a deep breath, Jack stepped out of the car. His disguise had been carefully planned. The new employees wouldn't recognize him. He had been managing things remotely, expanding to new locations, while this particular dealership had been under the care of his newly promoted sales manager, Nathan Carter. Carter had been doing well. At least that's what Jack had assumed. But now, Jack felt the need to see things with his own eyes. He needed to know what was happening under his roof. As he approached the showroom, Jack noticed Nathan standing by the windows, scanning the lot. His new manager had a predatory gaze, a sharp, calculating look that Jack didn't like. Though he tried to push the thought away, Nathan was doing what he was hired to do, after all, manage sales. "Welcome to Matthews Motors," a young, eager voice called out from behind him. Jack turned to find Tim, a fresh-faced salesman, walking toward him with a wide grin. "What brings you in today, sir?" Jack dropped his shoulders and adjusted his posture to look more casual, more like a regular guy looking to buy a truck. "Name's Mark Thompson," he said, changing his voice to sound less like the confident, authoritative businessman he really was. "I've been saving up for a while now. Need something reliable for my construction work." Tim's eyes lit up. The prospect of a sale was always thrilling for a salesman, especially when the customer seemed genuinely interested. "Ah, we've got exactly what you need. Our heavy-duty models are built to withstand any kind of tough work site. Let me show you around." Tim led him through the lot, showing Jack a variety of trucks. Jack observed everything with a keen eye. How Tim presented the trucks, which features he emphasized, and most importantly, what he didn't mention. Jack already knew how the sales tactics worked. He had implemented most of them himself in the early days, but the hidden fees, the fine print, the manipulation of customers, that was what he was worried about now. That's what he needed to investigate. They stopped in front of a shiny silver Ford F-150. It was one of the dealership's best sellers. Tim gave Jack the pitch, highlighting the towing capacity, the safety features, and the truck's overall reliability. "This one just came in last week," Tim said. "It's a beauty. It's got everything you need, and it's perfect for someone in your line of work. And with our exclusive Matthews Protection Plan, you're covered for any future issues." Jack's ears perked up at the mention of the protection plan. He knew that the protection package was supposed to be an optional add-on, not something automatically included in the truck's price. That was one of the things Jack had been hearing complaints about in the reviews. Unwanted add-ons, hidden fees, the works. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" Jack asked, playing his role of an interested, knowledgeable customer. Tim led Jack around the truck to the engine, but Jack noticed how Tim was anxiously glancing back at the showroom. Jack followed his gaze to see Nathan watching from the window. Something about the interaction made Jack feel uneasy. He had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. After a quick inspection and a test drive, Jack agreed to begin the paperwork. Tim led him into the showroom, where the cold air conditioning offered a welcome relief from the summer heat. They sat at Tim's desk, and Jack could feel the tension in the air. The salesman who had come before him had already put pressure on Jack's disguised identity, trying to close the deal quickly. "So, Mr. Thompson," Tim said, his hands slightly trembling as he pulled up the forms on his computer. "We just need to go over some standard paperwork. The base price is $37,000, and with our premium protection package and processing fees, it brings the total up to $42,000. Jack's hand subtly gripped the edge of the desk, his focus now razor-sharp. He had been expecting this, the added fees, the costs that weren't up front, but he needed to know more. "What kind of processing fees are we talking about?" Jack asked, keeping his voice casual, but his eyes never leaving Tim's. Before Tim could respond, a commotion caught their attention. Jack turned his head, careful not to give away his interest. A man at the neighboring desk, Tom Henderson, was in a heated discussion with one of the senior salespeople. Jack's instincts told him this was important. Something was about to unfold. He positioned himself to watch, leaning back in his chair as the noise continued. His heart rate picked up as he realized the conversation was about to expose something he needed to understand fully. The tension in the showroom thickened as Tom Henderson's voice cracked with emotion. "This isn't right. My wife and I calculated everything, down to the last dollar. We've been saving for 2 years for this truck," he shouted, his hands gripping a stack of papers. Jack watched as Tom, a delivery driver, stood at the desk, his red uniform bearing the logo of a local company. The desperation in his voice, the weariness on his face, Jack knew exactly what he was feeling. This wasn't just about buying a vehicle. It was about hope. And it seemed like the dealership was crushing that hope. Nathan, the sales manager, emerged from his office, his expensive suit contrasting sharply with Tom's humble appearance. His polished smile didn't reach his eyes. Jack watched closely as Nathan calmly responded, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your frustration, but these fees are clearly outlined in the fine print of your agreement," Nathan said, pulling out a document and pointing to small, hard-to-read paragraphs. Jack's blood began to boil. He had seen enough. The fine print was where all the deception lay, the hidden fees, the bogus charges, and it was the salespeople's job to make sure the customers never saw it until it was too late. Tom's shoulders slumped as Nathan's words crushed his spirit. Jack's mind raced. How many other customers had been manipulated like this? How deep did this corruption run? And, more importantly, how many of his own employees were complicit in it? Jack wanted to step in, to reveal himself, and stop the madness right then and there. But he knew he couldn't yet. Not without evidence, not without proof. He needed to dig deeper. He needed to know exactly what was going on behind the scenes. Jack, still undercover as Mark Thompson, continued to observe the transaction as it unfolded. Jack Matthews felt his heart race, but he maintained his composure as he watched Tom Henderson's crushing encounter with Nathan. The entire scene felt all too familiar. The aggressive tactics, the underhanded fees, the broken promises. This was exactly the kind of dishonest behavior Jack feared had infiltrated his business. It was one thing to hear rumors and complaints, but watching it unfold in front of him made his blood boil. The showroom felt smaller now. The distance between Jack and his employees seemed to grow as he observed the subtle manipulation at play. His mind was running through the steps needed to clean house, but he knew that the next step needed to be methodical. There were too many variables at stake. He needed concrete evidence before he could confront Nathan and root out the corruption festering in Matthews Motors. As the heated exchange between Tom and Nathan wound down, Jack knew it was time to press forward with his investigation. Tom was left standing in the showroom, his face pale and defeated. The weight of the situation was clear. For a moment, Jack caught a glimpse of his own father's weary face in Tom's, a reflection of the struggles he'd endured before starting Matthews Motors. "Hey, Tim," Jack called out, breaking the silence. "Can you get me the final breakdown on all these fees?" Tim glanced over, a mixture of relief and guilt in his eyes. He clearly didn't want to push Jack, but his manager was expecting results. He nervously shuffled the papers in front of him and pulled out a new set of documents. As he handed them over, Jack noticed his hand trembling. "Here you go, Mr. Thompson. This is the standard breakdown, but I'll get you the specifics on the premium package and the additional processing fees shortly," Tim said. Jack glanced through the paperwork, suppressing a grim smile. He knew what he was looking for, the hidden fees and the additional charges buried deep in the fine print. The breakdown was all too familiar. But now, with his undercover position, he could finally put a name to the tactics being used at Matthews Motors. Before he could dive deeper into the paperwork, he caught Nathan's eye. The sales manager was standing in his office doorway, observing Jack from a distance, though he couldn't know that Jack was aware of the game being played. Nathan's calculated gaze made Jack's instincts scream, but he forced himself to keep up the appearance of an interested customer. His job wasn't done yet. He couldn't afford to blow his cover. Nathan walked over slowly, maintaining his practiced smile. "Mr. Thompson, I see you're getting familiar with our offerings. I just wanted to make sure you're happy with everything so far." Jack knew this was his moment, the moment when the sales manager would try to close him. Nathan was a master at making customers feel comfortable while selling them a lie. Jack held his ground, keeping his demeanor calm but firm. "Everything looks good so far," Jack replied casually, but his eyes never left Nathan's. "Though I did have a few questions about the extra charges. These processing fees and protection packages don't seem to be standard in the industry. Can you explain them a little more?" Nathan's smile faltered for just a second, too quick to notice unless you were watching closely. Then, as though nothing had happened, he stepped up to Jack's desk and leaned in slightly. "Well, Mr. Thompson," Nathan began, his voice dripping with smooth professionalism. "Our premium protection package is actually a service we offer to all customers to ensure their vehicles are covered. It's not optional, but it really provides great value in the long run." Jack's pulse quickened. He had caught a crucial detail in Nathan's words. The protection package was never supposed to be mandatory, yet here was the manager trying to sell it as if it was part of the package. Jack's mind was already racing, weighing his options. He could keep playing along, or he could push further, risk breaking character, and expose the truth. Jack kept his face neutral. "Sounds like a great package," he said, but his voice was laced with skepticism. "But I'm just wondering, what exactly do I get with that package? Is it something that everyone at Matthews Motors gets, or is it more specific?" Nathan shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced over his shoulder, and Jack followed his eyes to see that no one else was watching. The showroom was still busy with customers, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Well," Nathan said, lowering his voice, "it's our exclusive offering for certain clients. But really, it's a great way to protect your investment." "Right," Jack replied, noting how Nathan's face had stiffened. "But I just don't see why it's automatically included. I mean, I didn't ask for it. I'm looking for transparency here, and as a customer, I'd prefer to know exactly what I'm paying for up front." Nathan's face twitched, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Well, we can definitely remove it from the final contract if you'd like. However, as I mentioned, we do recommend it." Jack wasn't convinced. Something about Nathan's behavior told him that this wasn't a one-off mistake. It was part of a pattern, one that he had to get to the bottom of. "All right, let's move on for now," Jack said, standing up. "I'd like to get a better understanding of all these hidden fees, though. Could you give me a breakdown of those charges before I move forward with anything?" Nathan's expression faltered again, but he quickly nodded. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. I'll make sure to have the complete breakdown ready." Jack watched him walk away, but not before giving Jack one last glance that screamed of uncertainty. Jack, maintaining his cover, moved away from Tim's desk and glanced around the showroom. It wasn't just Nathan he had to worry about. The entire dealership was operating under an unspoken code of deceit. Jack had seen it too many times already. Hidden fees, inflated prices, and no real transparency. It was clear that the sales culture here was toxic, and it wasn't just Nathan pulling the strings. As Jack stood there, pretending to consider a vehicle, his mind raced through the information he had gathered. But he needed more. He needed to understand the full extent of what was happening in Matthews Motors before he confronted Nathan and anyone else involved. There were too many players in this game, and Jack needed to know who could be trusted. The sound of raised voices from the far end of the showroom caught his attention. Jack subtly turned to watch, making sure he didn't reveal his true identity. This could be the breakthrough he needed. He wasn't about to let this slide. Not after everything he'd built. He would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 3: Unmasking the System. The tension in Matthews Motors was palpable, and as Jack Matthews moved through the showroom, a part of him still couldn't believe what was unfolding. This wasn't just about a few isolated incidents of bad sales tactics. No, this was a full-fledged operation designed to deceive every customer that walked through the door. Jack had been quietly observing for hours, collecting fragments of the puzzle. Every conversation, every interaction, every piece of paperwork, all of it pointed to one thing. Nathan Carter had created a culture of exploitation. The customers were being manipulated. The employees were being coerced. And the whole dealership was benefiting from it. The sounds of laughter and idle chatter filled the showroom, but Jack couldn't focus on any of that. His mind was sharp, calculating, as he pieced together the evidence. Nathan's earlier attempt to smooth over the situation with Tom Henderson had been an eye-opener, but now Jack needed more. He needed proof that this wasn't just a few rogue salespeople gone astray. He needed to confirm that Nathan was orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. As he watched the salespeople move from one customer to another, Jack realized that no one was above suspicion. Tim, the young salesman who had nervously shuffled paperwork earlier, was clearly trying to keep his head down. But the others? They were playing the same game, moving the customers through the process, quickly glossing over the hidden fees and steering them toward the premium packages. Jack's instincts told him to approach Tim again. The young salesman was clearly new to the game, and Jack wondered if he could trust him. But if Jack was going to get the answers he needed, he had to tread carefully. "Hey, Tim," Jack called, making his way to the sales desk where the young man was filing some papers. "Got a minute?" Tim looked up, his face a mixture of exhaustion and hope. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What can I do for you?" Jack lowered his voice, careful not to let anyone overhear their conversation. "I need to know more about how you guys operate here, specifically how the commissions work." Nathan said something about getting rewarded for closing sales quickly, but I'm not sure I understand the full picture. Tim's eyes darted around the room, scanning for Nathan or anyone else who might be eavesdropping. When he saw no one was looking, he leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Well, it's all about the upsell," Tim said, his tone conspiratorial. "We get a base commission, but it's the added packages that really make the money. The extended warranties, the protection plans, all that stuff. If we don't push them, we don't get the big paydays. But if we sell enough of the add-ons, Nathan gives us better hours, better leads, and better commissions." Jack's pulse quickened. This was exactly what he had suspected. The hidden fees weren't just about padding the dealership's profits, they were a way to control the salespeople, too. Nathan was using financial incentives to push his team into unethical behavior. And for those who refused to play along, well, they were quickly sidelined or pushed out. "Right," Jack replied, keeping his voice calm. "And what happens if someone, like Tom Henderson, doesn't want to sell those packages? What's the fallout?" Tim shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers nervously tapping the desk. "Well, if you don't sell the packages, you get stuck with the bad shifts. Early mornings, Sundays, when nobody's shopping for trucks. It's a way to make sure you either play the game or you don't make any money." Jack absorbed the information quietly, his mind racing. He had all the proof he needed now. Nathan's entire operation was a well-oiled machine designed to exploit both customers and employees. And Tom Henderson's earlier words rang in Jack's ears. "I'll report this to the owner." The fact that Tom had been willing to speak up showed there was a glimmer of hope in this broken system. But Jack couldn't do anything until he had hard evidence. "I appreciate you being honest with me, Tim," Jack said, giving the young salesman a reassuring nod. "Keep your head down and keep doing what you're doing. I'll handle the rest." Tim's eyes widened with relief. Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I just want to do things the right way. Jack smiled. You're doing fine, kid. Just keep it up. As Jack walked away, his thoughts were clear. It was time to confront Nathan. But he couldn't just walk into Nathan's office and demand answers. No, that would give him too much of a chance to cover his tracks. Jack needed something more concrete, something irrefutable. He had to find a way to get Nathan to admit the truth himself. As he moved across the showroom floor, Jack noticed Tom Henderson, the customer he had been following all day, was still waiting to speak with Nathan. Jack had kept his distance, but now, seeing the distressed look on Tom's face, something inside him told him that the confrontation was about to reach its breaking point. Jack turned to look at Tim, who was now speaking with another customer. A flash of inspiration hit him. He needed to dig deeper. He needed to observe firsthand how Nathan handled every aspect of a sale, from initial pitch to closing. If he could find a way to expose Nathan's manipulation in front of everyone, the tide would turn. As Tom Henderson made his way back to the desk, Jack knew what he had to do next. He needed to escalate the situation. Bring it to the point where Nathan couldn't hide the truth any longer. He needed the proof, and he needed it now. Jack Matthews had been biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to confront Nathan Carter. After spending the last few hours digging through the dealership's operations, he had gathered enough evidence to expose the fraudulent tactics that had poisoned his company. But the final confrontation had to be handled delicately. One wrong move, and Nathan could shut him down before Jack had the chance to make the truth public. The dealership was now starting to thin out for the evening. The rush of customers had died down, and the workers were winding down their shifts, eager to head home after a long day. But Jack wasn't about to let Nathan slip away unnoticed. He needed to ensure that everything was in place before he made his move. He walked towards the back offices where Nathan had retreated after his earlier dealings with Tom Henderson. The moment was close. Jack could feel the anticipation growing. This wasn't just about reclaiming the dealership's integrity. It was about something much bigger, a chance to restore the trust that had been broken, both with the customers and with his employees. He had already witnessed enough deception to last a lifetime, and he couldn't let Nathan walk away with the satisfaction of winning this battle. As Jack approached Nathan's office, he noticed Tom Henderson pacing near the customer lounge, looking lost and disheartened. Jack's eyes narrowed as he watched the customer's shoulders sag in defeat. He had seen that look before, the same look his father had worn when he was cheated out of a fair deal many years ago. It was the look of someone who had been exploited, but worse, someone who had been led to believe that exploitation was a normal part of doing business. "Mr. Matthews," Tom greeted Jack as he walked past him. "I'm just about done here. Thanks for being a good customer, at least." Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hang in there, Tom. We're going to get this sorted out. You've been more than patient." Tom gave Jack a half smile, nodding as he walked out. As Jack made his way into Nathan's office, he steeled himself for what was coming next. Nathan was sitting behind his desk, the man who had so carefully constructed a web of lies, waiting to be exposed. The moment of truth had arrived. "Mr. Matthews?" Nathan said with a forced smile as he looked up. "I wasn't expecting to see you here at this hour. Everything going smoothly?" Jack smiled back, but it was a cold, calculating smile. "Actually, Nathan, no, not everything's going smoothly." Nathan's demeanor immediately shifted. The confident, polished manager he had been earlier was gone, replaced by someone who knew the jig was up. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, studying Jack carefully. "What do you mean?" "I've seen everything, Nathan," Jack said, his voice firm and steady. "I've seen the way you've been running this dealership into the ground, the way you manipulate customers, deceive them into paying more than they should, force your salespeople into following your corrupt system, or lose their jobs. It's not just bad business, Nathan. It's illegal." Nathan's face twisted in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I'm running this dealership." Jack cut him off, walking around the desk and leaning in closer. "No, Nathan, you've been running a scam, and it's time for everyone to know about it." Nathan's face turned red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I've built this business into what it is today, You think this is all some kind of mistake? Jack's patience was wearing thin. He had known that Nathan was arrogant, but he hadn't expected this level of deflection. I've seen the contracts, Nathan. I've listened to the recordings. I know about the bogus fees you've been tacking onto sales and the deceptive practices you've been using to keep your sales team in line. You can't hide from the truth anymore. Nathan stood up, his fists clenched in anger. You think you can just walk in here and accuse me of all this? You don't even know the first thing about how the business works. Jack didn't flinch. He stood his ground, staring Nathan down. I know enough, Nathan, and I have enough evidence to take you down. Nathan's eyes flickered to the door, calculating his options. Jack could see the wheels turning in his mind. He had spent so many years hiding behind a mask of professionalism that it was hard for him to comprehend that someone like Jack Matthews could see right through him. Jack let the silence hang in the air, making Nathan squirm. He knew that the next move was critical. It was time to lay it all out in front of Nathan, to force him to face the consequences of his actions. Here's what's going to happen, Nathan, Jack said, his voice cold and calm. You're going to sit down and listen. You're going to listen to everything I have to say, and then you're going to explain yourself to the staff. Because I've already made arrangements to have everyone come in. They'll hear exactly what you've been doing, and they'll see the evidence. And when they do, your career here is over. Nathan sneered. You think you can just? Enough, Jack shouted, cutting him off. This isn't about you, Nathan. This is about doing what's right for the people who have trusted this dealership for years. It's about the customers who've been exploited, and it's about the employees who've been scared into silence. It ends today. Nathan's eyes darted to the door again, but this time he didn't make a move. Jack had him cornered, and Jack was going to make sure he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. The tension in Nathan's office was palpable. Jack Matthews had laid out the situation with brutal clarity, and the reality was sinking in for Nathan Carter. As the walls closed in, he felt the weight of his actions crashing down on him. For a moment, he stood there, speechless, before slowly sitting back down in his chair, his body slumped with defeat. Jack stood tall, his gaze unrelenting, his posture solid and confident. He had known this moment would come, the inevitable confrontation that would bring the truth to light. But seeing Nathan's pride crumple before him still gave him a sense of satisfaction. After years of deceit, it was time for the truth to be exposed. So, Jack continued, his voice cutting through the silence, now that you've had a moment to process what's happening, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't just about you. This is about every customer who's been misled and every employee who's been manipulated into thinking this was the right way to do business. Nathan finally broke the silence, but his words were not the defiant retorts Jack expected. Instead, they came out in a low, almost apologetic tone. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never intended for it to get out of hand. Jack raised an eyebrow. Really? Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you fix things when you saw them going wrong? You knew this was wrong from the beginning. You just wanted more. More sales, more commission, more power. Nathan's face flushed red. You think it's that simple? This dealership, it's bigger than just me. The whole operation depends on keeping the numbers up. I did what I had to do to keep it running. You mean you did what you had to do to line your pockets? Jack shot back, his voice cold with disdain. You've been using manipulation and fear to keep your employees in line, and now you've dragged the entire reputation of this place through the mud. There was a long pause. Nathan finally looked down, avoiding Jack's gaze. His hands shook slightly, a sign of the stress and fear creeping in. Jack knew that deep down, Nathan was a man who had rationalized his actions for far too long, but now the consequences were inescapable. So, what now? Nathan finally asked, his voice strained. What do you expect me to do? Just hand over the keys and walk away? Jack smiled, a cold, calculating smile. It's not that simple, Nathan. This is about accountability. You're going to explain yourself to the staff. You're going to tell them exactly how deep this corruption runs, and when the truth comes out, you'll be done. But that's only if you cooperate. Nathan's eyes narrowed. You think they'll listen to you? You think they'll buy this? Trust me, Jack replied firmly. They'll listen. As Jack finished speaking, he pressed a button on his phone. A loud beep signaled the start of a new chapter. He had already arranged for a staff meeting to take place. One by one, employees began filtering into the dealership, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. Many of them had never seen Jack Matthews in person. Most knew of him only by reputation, a shadowy figure who had managed the business remotely. When they saw him standing in front of Nathan's office, they exchanged confused glances, unsure of what was going on. Jack didn't waste time. He stood in front of the gathering crowd and spoke. "Everyone, please take a seat. I have something important to address." "Nathan," Jack continued, his voice carrying throughout the room, "why don't you join us?" Nathan stood slowly, his posture slouched, knowing full well that the truth was about to catch up to him. He walked toward the front of the room, his face pale and resigned. Jack could sense the discomfort emanating from him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack began, his voice steady, "I'm sure you've all heard various things over the past few months. Some of you may have seen the glowing reviews from customers. Others may have heard complaints about hidden fees and aggressive sales tactics. Well, today, I want to reveal the truth about what's been going on behind closed doors." Jack turned to Nathan. "Nathan, I've gathered enough evidence to show everyone exactly how deep this corruption runs, how you've been manipulating customers and employees alike. It's time for you to tell everyone the truth." Nathan swallowed hard, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Jack pressed a button on his phone, and the audio recordings of Nathan's conversations came to life. The room fell silent as Nathan's own words filled the air, revealing the ugly truth about his dealings with customers, his fraudulent schemes, and the manipulation of his employees. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Jack asked, his eyes fixed on Nathan. "Because the evidence is right here for everyone to hear." Nathan's face was a mixture of guilt and anger. But he didn't answer. He could no longer deny what had been exposed. His defiance had been replaced by the sinking realization that he had been caught in the act. "We'll be reviewing every contract from the past 6 months, Jack continued, turning back to the staff. "Every customer who was overcharged will be contacted and compensated, and everyone involved in this corruption will be held accountable." A hushed murmur rippled through the room as the employees began to digest what was happening. Some were ashamed, others angry, and a few were visibly relieved that the truth was finally coming out. Jack wasn't finished. "Nathan," he said, his tone growing colder, "you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. I suggest you don't touch anything. Your computer is already under surveillance." The silence in the room grew deafening as Nathan's face turned red with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, but the finality in Jack's voice left no room for argument. 2 security guards appeared at the door, signaling the end of Nathan's reign over the dealership. The staff watched in silence as Nathan was escorted out, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. Jack took a deep breath, allowing the tension in the room to subside. He turned back to the employees, many of whom were still in shock. "From now on," Jack continued, "we'll rebuild this dealership on integrity. Every single one of you will be given the tools to succeed honestly. If you've ever felt that your job was at risk because of doing the right thing, that ends now. We're going to make Matthews Motors the model of ethical business practices, and we're going to make it right for every customer who has been wronged." Jack Matthews stood in front of his employees, watching as the dealership transformed before his eyes. The lies had been exposed, the corruption was being cleaned up, and the company's future now rested on a foundation built with honesty and integrity. As he glanced out over the showroom, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It had taken months to get to this point. He had worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, making recordings, and piecing together the full scope of the scam Nathan had been running. But now, everything had changed. Tomorrow, the work would begin.